Hello world. You might remember me talking about covering episodic games, whether to review them individually or wait until the full set is out, and how I hadn't really made a decision on that. I still haven't. In the meantime, here's Odysseus Kosmos and his robot quest, the first of 5 planned episodes in this series made by Pavel Kostin and published by HeroCraft. They seem to have a rather eccentric collection of titles to their name, genre-wise. As for Odysseus Kosmos, it's sci-fi, it's comedic, and the story opens a little something like this. Sometime in the future, we find ourselves far away from the Earth place aboard the spaceship San Francisco, which is parked near both a black hole and a planet where time moves much slower on the surface, a bit like that one episode of Star Trek Voyager, but in reverse. That planet is where the rest of the San Francisco's crew currently are and have been for a few years, although it's said that from their perspective it could have been a mere half hour. On the ship itself we have only a service robot named Barton Quest and the ship's engineer Odysseus Kosmos, and since I'm terrified of calling him Odysseus Kent by mistake, I'll call him Oddy for the duration. That's what Barton calls him anyway. Side note, I can't remember the last time I heard of a robot getting a second name, that seems unusual. Back to Oddy though, he's the main character, an engineer who happily devotes his time to converting highly advanced scientific equipment into a coffee machine instead of doing any of the boring tasks assigned to him. And this story of a tinkerer who wants to use his skills for anything except his actual job is hitting a little too close to home for me, so let's move on. What I like is that this characterization flows nicely into the story. In fact, it pretty much is the story of the first episode. Things are broken on the ship and Barton has to convince Oddy to actually do the duties that are part of that job he took. In the meantime, we get banter that fleshes out the somewhat cantankerous relationship these two have. We learn a bit more about the mission the ship is on, where the rest of the crew are, and how the isolation is affecting Oddy in their absence. It's still a comedic game, meaning the isolation stuff is downplayed, but it's there, and it's done in a way that feels natural. From item descriptions and conversations rather than pausing the game while your main character gives the speech equivalent of the first song of every Disney princess ever. While we're on that, the game opens with a comparatively somber song that does not suggest comedy in any way. Hell, it worked for the first 2 series of Red Dwarf, why not here? Maybe it's to set up a juxtaposition with the comedy that comes pretty soon after it, I'm not sure. Then again, the rest of the in-game music is electronic ambience, setting much the same tone as the opening track and doing a very good job in doing so. Put it this way, I'd completed the entire game before I noticed that it only has about 2 music tracks. Perhaps a little more dramatic than what I expected, although bear in mind that when I say comedic, I don't mean tries to make you laugh with every single line. Broadly speaking, the game has a light-hearted tone throughout, except for the opening and the background music, etc. When I first started playing, I thought I'd messed up and set the language to Russian rather than English, but it turns out the characters only speak in voice barks, Banjo-Kazooie style, or perhaps more like Lydia if you played that game or watched a review of it. Hint, 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 hint. The barks themselves sound Russian to my Western ass, hence the confusion. Should probably have guessed when voice acting appeared absolutely nowhere on the Steam store page or the game's website, but I only noticed these things once I start doing my research. Why I then choose to include these embarrassments in the video script is beyond me, but here we are. It doesn't really detract from the experience. Its main purpose appears to be letting you know which character is talking. It achieves that purpose. Not much more to say there. Playing the game itself felt surprisingly smooth. I've been debating whether or not to use that extremely vague descriptor because whilst it's the first word that springs to mind, it's going to need a big ol' pile of justification. Perhaps the pixel art graphics made me think it was going to be a clunky affair with minimal animation, but nope, smooth, responsive, looks great. Interaction is handled by a coin interface, which regular viewers will know is not my favourite, and yet it feels smooth. Helped a lot by the minuscule time from clicking to coin being ready to use, the large hard to miss buttons, and the fact that you'll only have 3 options to pick from: look, talk, and use. And given the ship's current crew complement, it's usually only look and use that are shown. Then we have the inventory, which is probably where most of my gripes are going to come from. Seems fine at first, you can mouse wheel through the contents, you can click an item to use it on something rather than having to click and drag. All plus points in my book, but it's constantly shown with no apparent way to hide it. Personally, I'd rather have had that option, especially when it means I can't double click to warp through an exit because the inventory covers it and I need to walk until the screen scrolls. Similarly, clicking an inventory item brings up the coin interface and it doesn't go away until the item is used or you cancel the selection, meaning it can cover up the object you meant to use your inventory item on in the first place. It doesn't prevent you using the item, the click will go through the coin interface to whatever's behind it, but it feels like a needless irritation. Up the top of that inventory interface you'll find the pause menu button and this question mark button which gives you hints when clicked. It's a very simple implementation that only gives you one hint for whatever puzzle you're working on, but it's welcome all the same. Also, it'll sometimes give you a cheeky wee message suggesting you try asking on the game's Facebook page, the scamp. And finally we have the usable items indicator which I have yet to name feature, which you'll most likely activate accidentally by clicking on the main character. Again, glad to see it. I guess the point I was trying to make with the word smooth is that apart from the overlap problem I just mentioned, the interface rarely feels like it's in the way of what you want to do, as it all should be. I wish the same could always be said of the gameplay, but at best I can say it mostly does that. It's a bit nitpicky, but bear with me for a bit. Good stuff first. Something about the gameplay and the puzzles really grabbed me. I've talked before about how I like being presented a set of problems that I can then solve. Riding up into town and fixing everything wrong with the place, that kind of tidying up gameplay. This game felt a lot like that to me. Now, in reality, it's a series of short fetch quests and object inventory puzzles, but it felt like it was me going around fixing up the ship, and I liked that, even if the guy I was playing as didn't. But a wee cherry on top of this handyman-based cake, there's puzzle-type puzzles. I really should get my dictionary set in stone one of these days. Puzzles where you interact with more than inventory objects, like this Tetris-looking thing here. They're not too difficult, but they're something different at least, and if they don't tickle your fancy, there's only about 2 of them, so worry not. That covers the majority of my time with this game, the parts I enjoyed. Strap yourself in for some nitpicks. Despite the hint system being there and working, there was a time or two where I had no idea what I was meant to be doing. There's these terminals that let you access the ship's systems, which helped in making me feel like an engineer solving problems, plus point there. But there was one computer that I mistook for yet another terminal. I mean, it's got a keyboard and a screen, what else would it be? The game wanted me to go to that console in particular, called the maintenance terminal I believe, and I couldn't distinguish it from any of the other keyboard with a screen objects I'd encountered. I'm labelling this as a nitpick because it was probably an oversight on my part. For one thing, the machine they wanted me to go to is labelled console as opposed to computer terminal for all the others. I'm pretty sure it was called the maintenance terminal in the hint, but still, one terminal that's different from the other terminals. I probably should have figured that out. What might have also helped is if the exits were labelled. Some of the rooms are easily identifiable when their name is mentioned. Exercise room, shower room, so on. And I just couldn't figure out which room contained the maintenance terminal that the hint was talking about. Okay, nitpicks aside, is this worth playing? I think so. I enjoyed the feeling of fixing things that the puzzles gave me, the banter between Audie and his metal companion amused me, and I do like me a sci-fi setting. That said, is it worth buying? Trickier question. This episode took me about 3 hours, and honestly that's a little bit short for the £15 asking price. To make it more complicated, you can get it from the game's website for less than that, and the season pass is not much more. But it also still says pre-order. I'm not sure what's going on there, or how you'll even receive the product once you pay. Maybe the higher price tag on Steam is to cover the cut that Valve takes from them. There's also a short free demo to try if you're curious. But this has me interested. It's demonstrated to me that the developer can make something I enjoy, and I hope I get to see what comes next for Odysseus Oh, bollocks.
Hör, det behövs,